We continue living in a divided world of many peoples, each with their own hopes, dreams, and values. Let's learn morality again together. Let's continue reading Sun Tzu's Art of War, Chapter 6, Weak Points and Strong. Sun Tzu said, "Whoever is first in the field and awaits the coming of the enemy will be fresh for the fight. Whoever is second in the field and has to hasten to battle will arrive exhausted." Therefore, the clever combatant imposes his will on the enemy, but does not allow the enemy's will to be imposed on him. By holding out advantages to him, he can cause the enemy to approach of his own accord, or by inflicting damage he can make it impossible for the enemy to draw near. If the enemy is taking his ease, he can harass him. If well supplied with food, he can starve him out. If quietly encamped, he can force him to move. Appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. March swiftly to places where you are not expected. So, these first 5 points all taken together mean there are many advantages to being first. You can control the conditions of the engagement, or if you can't control the conditions of the engagement, you've marched swiftly or slowly to the wrong place. But either way, march swiftly to places where you're not expected, and appear at points which the enemy must hasten to defend. So, have situational awareness. An army may march great distances without distress if it marches through country where the enemy is not. You can be sure of succeeding in your attacks if you only attack places which are undefended. You can ensure the safety of your defense if you only hold positions that cannot be attacked. Hence, that general is skillful in attack whose opponent does not know what to defend, and he is skillful in defense whose opponent does not know what to attack. I'm not sure I fully agree here. Yes, there is advantage to outsmarting the opponent's army in general. However, I don't know you can fully attribute that to the cleverness of your own general and army. O divine art of subtlety and secrecy! Through you we learn to be invisible, through you inaudible, and hence we can hold the enemy's fate in our hands. You may advance and be absolutely irresistible if you make for the enemy's weak points. You may retire and be safe from pursuit if your movements are more rapid than those of the enemy. If we wish to fight, the enemy can be forced into an engagement, even though he be sheltered behind a high rampart and a deep ditch. All we need to do is attack some other place that he will be obliged to relieve. Now, in contemporary settings, it might be harder to come by that kind of thing. But, if an enemy has like a weapons stash or some other precious resource, or has to defend something, you can go attack that thing and force the enemy out, and force them to fight under your conditions instead of theirs. However, if we do not wish to fight, we can prevent the enemy from engaging us, even though the lines of our encampment will be merely traced out on the ground. All we need to do is throw something odd and unaccountable in his way. By discovering the enemy's dispositions and remaining invisible ourselves, we can keep our forces concentrated while the enemy's must be divided. I keep making this tie back to chess and shogi and so forth. In these strategy games, this has largely been my plan, to confuse my opponent, and in causing such confusion, eventually hopefully strike upon a good idea of my own. But just pay attention to what the opponent's trying to do. Try to fluster whatever it is they're trying to do. And once I seize upon an idea as to, like, taking the center or attacking some weakness or trying to promote a pawn or something like that. If it looks like a really strong idea, I'll take a second look at it and make sure it is so strong and then pursue it. I don't dive straight in. Anyway, we can form a single united body, while the enemy must split up into fractions. Hence, there will be a whole pitted against separate parts of a whole, which means that we shall be many to the enemy's few. And if we are able thus to attack an inferior force with a superior one, our opponents will be in dire straits. The spot which we intend to fight must not be made known, for then the enemy will have to prepare a possible attack at several different points, and his forces being thus distributed in many directions, the numbers we will have to face at any given point will be proportionately few. For should the enemy strengthen his van, he will weaken his rear. Should he strengthen his rear, he will weaken his van. Should he strengthen his left, he will weaken his right. Should he strengthen his right, he'll weaken his left. If he sends reinforcements everywhere he will be weak. Numerical weakness comes from having to prepare against possible attacks. Numerical strength from compelling our adversary to make those preparations against us. Now, in previous sections, there was a point about the general who's aware of the conditions of the field and the heavens, the earth, and so forth. Just because your opponent or your enemy is making a threat doesn't make that threat a credible one. So there is some wisdom in preparing for certain attacks more than others. There's absolutely a wisdom in seizing the initiative, at least to the extent it can be seized. Moving on. Knowing the place and the time of the coming battle, we may concentrate from the greatest distances in order to fight. But if neither time nor place be known, then the left wing will be impotent to succor the right. The right will be equally impotent to succor the left. The van unable to relieve the rear, or the rear to support the van. How much more so if the furthest portions of the enemy are anything under 100 li apart, and even the nearest are separated by several li. Though according to my estimate the soldiers of Yue exceed our own in number, that shall advantage them nothing in the matter of victory. I say then that victory can be achieved. Though the enemy be stronger in numbers, we may prevent him in fighting, scheme as to discover his plans and the likelihood of their success. Hey look, Sun Tzu is coming up with my ideas. How wonderful. Rouse him and learn the principle of his activity or inactivity. Force him to reveal himself so as to find out his vulnerable spots. And, I keep bringing up turn-based strategy games, but I keep forgetting, like, RPGs and other strategy games. Role-playing games, or I forget the real-life equivalent where you're dealing with a dungeon master. Maybe that's also considered a role-playing game, but party-based games. It's a standard tactic for adventurers to force enemies to reveal themselves. It makes for excellent storytelling, but also to the extent that you can actually do this and for real combat conditions, do it. Carefully compare the opposing army with your own so that you may know where strength is abundant and where it's deficient. In making tactical dispositions, the highest pitch you can attain is to conceal them. Conceal your dispositions and you'll be safe from the prying of the subtlest spies, from the machinations of the wisest brains. How victory may be produced for them out of the enemy's own tactics, that is what the multitude cannot comprehend. All men can see the tactics whereby I conquer, but what none can see is the strategy out of which victory is evolved. Do not repeat the tactics which have gained you one victory, but let your methods be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances. Unless it's the right method, and then just do it over and over again, but that's rarely how things work. The military tactics are like unto water, for water in its natural course runs away from high places and hastens downwards. So in war, the way is to avoid what is strong and to strike at what is weak. Water shapes its course according to the nature of the ground over which it flows. The soldier works out his victory in relation to the foe with whom he is facing. Therefore, just as water retains no constant shape, so in warfare there are no constant conditions. You know, people who deal with hydraulic engineering might say, well, yes, but there are recurrent patterns, and yeah, there are some things that tend to be effective. There's certain sorts of water activity that you just repeatedly have to deal with, and we've come up with systems for dealing with them. I guess this harkens back to Sun Tzu's earlier point that if you're always doing the same thing, if you repeat your tactics for one victory, expect to find resistance the next time around. You can modify his tactics in relation to the opponent and thereby succeed in winning, may be called a heaven-born captain. The five elements, water, fire, wood, metal, earth, are not always equally predominant. The four seasons make way for each other in turn. There are short days and long. The moon has its periods of waning and waxing. It reminds me of the series Avatar. Yeah, there's a balance to be found in all things. In my opinion, there are many good points. Obviously, this is a well-regarded work. I think some points here might be overstated about the cleverness, etc. But the more fundamental points about, like, not fully signaling your intentions, unless you're in such a position that you are guaranteed an overwhelming victory anyway and it doesn't matter. But like concealing your plans can be fruitful when it makes a difference. Understanding the opponent's plans or the enemy's plans, likewise, and understanding the conditions, that can help you succeed. And it helps to not just understand this at some artificial level. I hear one player who keeps talking in terms of, oh, I went too hard, or I didn't go hard enough. And it's like, this is the most superficial way you can consider a thing. Sun Tzu stresses the importance of measuring and understanding the extent of the attack and the extent of the defense. And that's a recurring theme throughout the work. That it's not just about, at a high level, having opinions. Although, if your opinions are just absolutely golden, then you don't necessarily need to do all the measurement. If you have divine instinct, then you can just intuit your way about things and not worry about the details. But chances are, on the flip side of that, if you can calculate everything, if you have perfect vision, the fact that you just don't have an intuition of your own doesn't necessarily matter. A computer can, through incredible amount of effort and some degree of organization about its information, produce opinions about conditions. So, yeah, through an abundance of energy and calculation, it could be possible to, without deliberately implementing a good strategy, you could still see a route to victory. Or if you have the divine insight, you don't necessarily need to look at the details. But your chances will improve the more you can both accurately foresee the future and you have some sense about what you're doing and some sense about what the opponent is doing and some sense about just military strategy in general. So every little bit helps. Doesn't necessarily matter who's strongest in numbers. If you can prevent the opponent from fighting, or if the opponent flusters their own efforts, don't unfluster them. Be aware of, like, if the opponent's tripping over their own armies, uh, like, seize the day, go attack something else and force the opponent to divide up. Yeah, go divide and conquer and so forth. Do things that work and learn from your experience, learn from your friends' experiences, successful and otherwise, and learn from your opponent too. Yeah, I'd like to say there's something more profound to this chapter, but I don't know. What was the title of this section again? Weak points and strong. Yeah, so I guess over time, I was impressed to see the AlphaGo challenge and see DeepMind's effort. We could see they created a computer that had a policy, and that policy governed which spaces of continuations are interesting to look at. And one could say that having this policy head allowed the computer to have an opinion about what things are weak and what things are strong and what are interesting and what are not. So, yeah, it's amazing to see the work of the world's best researchers at play. Perhaps someday those machines can help. I'd like to see better tooling to help us understand the conditions around us. Because although we are excellent at processing visual data, obtaining visual data in the first place is a bit challenging, as always. So the better tooling we can have that can generate the visualizations in the first place can help us better learn from machine tooling and learn and communicate more effectively with each other too. That seems a bit abstract. I'll give it another 5 or 10 years and see what I think about it then. Yeah, thanks for listening. Have a good day.